Hello and welcome to this quick guide where I'm going to take a look at adding some functionality to the trains that we made in the original trains tutorial, where I looked at the TrackWorx package and how we can get a train moving around in our game world on the tracks with a couple of carriages attached. So in this tutorial you can already see that the train has stopped at the station, so that's one thing we're going to look at. If I climb aboard, you can see that I can drive the train, which is another thing we're going to look at. And finally, I can jump into the passenger car and ride along in the train. So, to start with, in order to get your train to stop anywhere on the track, you need to create what's called a blocker. So here we can see that I have created a blocker here. This is simply a locator with the TW transform script attached. Once you've added a locator in your TW transform script, you need to specify within the TW transform which track this locator should block on. So the track here is this section of track here. And also give it a number in this T property here. 0 being the first bit of the track that the train encounters, so this bit over here. And 1 being the furthest bit from where the train first encounters, so over here. And a decimal along that number line. So it being 0.5 should put it in the middle of this bit of track around here. If it was 0.25, it would be around here, 0.75 around here, and so on. So once you've added that script to that locator and you've added the track and the T position within that, you should find that that's everything you need to do in order to make the train stop at that particular point. Now the position of the locator doesn't really matter. The position is set according to the track and the T value. If I want to make it so the train can continue, that's what this button's doing here. When you interact with this button, it's calling the function set unblocked on the TW transform script, which is attached to the station blocker. And that's how we can turn it on and off. We can set unblocked and we can set blocked. So on this piece of track here, when the train has left, so on last exit on the TW track section script, when the train's left, you can see that I've added the station blocker there and I've set blocked. So this switch is setting the blocker to unblocked so the train can go. And then when the train leaves this section of track over here, we're setting that blocker to active again so the train has to stop when it comes back round to this bit of track. So essentially using different events in our game to turn on or off that blocker. And you can kind of do use whatever event you want to turn on or off that blocker just by using the set blocked and set unblocked. Now when it comes to riding the train, we've set that up on this carriage over here. So this carriage, if I click on the TW train steam coach, you can see that I've attached this locator within the carriage. So the locator is in the exact position that I want the player to be able to ride the train. So I've positioned it there and I've added the script TW rider seat, which is a part of the TrackWorx package also. I've added that script to the locator, and then within that script I've added the on rider sit, and I've set the blocker transform, TW transform, to unblocked, the one at the front of the platform that I was just playing with the button. I've set that to unblocked. So when I jump in, when I'm sitting down in this position here, the train will essentially go. It will be unblocked. In order to use that rider, that seat there, there's a couple of things we need to do. The first one is when you set up an event to jump on the train, to sit on the train. So I've got it so that when you interact with this whole train, it essentially calls the rider seat, TW rider seat. It will call that script and it will call the sit function and send through the player that just interacted with the train. So when a player interacts with the train, they will sit at the exact point that their seat is within the train. So that's one thing we need to do. Another thing we need to do is go to the player template, select the player, click entity, create child, camera. once you've added the camera, you need to add the TW rider camera script to the camera. And that will then mean that the player can get on the train and stare leisurely out of the window as it makes its way around the track. In order to disembark from the train, in order to get off the train, there's a few things we need to do there. The first thing is to create a set of controls that you can give the player when they jump on the train. And the way we did that was to get a locator, add a new custom script to that locator called cab controls, and that script looks a little bit like this. Essentially, to get off the train, you just need to have two properties, rider and rider seat. Listen out for the function on assigned to rider, which gets past these three parameters here, and capture the rider and the rider seat within the two properties you've set there. Then, because this is going to be added to the player character when they jump on the train, we hook into the on button pressed API call, which passes us the button that was pressed. And then if the button was interact, get hold of the seat that we're on and call the rider get out function on that seat, so that we can interact to get on the train and sit in the seat. And if we interact again when we're within the seat, it will call this rider get out function. So we're giving our players some additional controls. With that locator, with the cab control script attached to it, make sure that you create it, turn it into a template. So we do that if I get a locator. We can turn that into a template by clicking on the locator, template, create new template. Once you've created it as a template, you can delete the locator and you should be able to see it in here. I've called mine cab controls template, which is just a locator with cab control script attached. Once you have that template, the next thing you need to do is find the seat, and make sure that the rider control template is set to your cab controls template. And that essentially means when we get in that rider seat, this template, a new entity is instantiated of that template and it's attached to the player, which means that then we can listen to button presses from the player. And that's essentially what we're doing there. So with the button presses now listened to, we should find that it will wait for us to say rider get out and allow us to disembark. Now, if you want your train to be one of those hop on, hop off kind of trains, you can make sure that your rider seat has got can disembark anywhere checked, and that will allow the player to get off from any bit of track. If you want your train to be more like a stop at the station kind of train, then make sure that that is unchecked. With that added to the with that cab controls template added to the rider seat, the final bit of the puzzle for exiting the train is making sure that any TW track section that the player can disembark from has the allow disembarkation checked, and then also has a locator on the disembarkation point property. I've just used the start location because that makes sense to me. That's exactly where the player will be positioned when they leave the train. So when the player jumps out of that train or exits the train, they will be moved to that point. So that's how to set up the train to ride in the carriage. And once you've done that, it's worth either turning that rider seat into a template or copying and pasting it if you want to look into giving your players the option to drive the train. You can copy and paste that rider seat and add it to the locomotive, so the front of the train. Position it exactly as we did before, so that the locator is pointing in the exact direction you want the camera to point. All of the other parts of the properties should stay the same, except we need to add a couple more things to our locomotive. So with the locomotive selected, if you followed the previous tutorial, you should see that it has the auto driver module attached. But we also need to attach a manual driver module and then switch between them. When we enter the locomotive, we should turn on manual drive and turn off auto drive. And so to do that, on the rider seat, when we have our on rider sits, we've got two new bindings. We have the auto driver, and we're going to deactivate that. So we're going to call the deactivate event on the TW module auto driver. And we're going to call the activate event on the manual driver. And we do the exact opposite on rider vacated. So when on rider vacated is called, we're going to call activate on the auto driver and deactivate on the manual driver. So we're essentially switching between manual and auto when we enter the locomotive. So that's the first part. The second part is to add some functionality to our cab control script. Remember, when you jump on the train, or when you sit on the train, this cab control script is added to your player, and it gives us the opportunity to hook into button pressed events. So in this train, I've added two new else ifs into this on top of the interact one there, which allowed us to disembark. The first one listens out for the primary button, and if the player presses the primary button, we set the desired throttle to 1. The second one listens out for the secondary button, and if the player presses that, we set the desired throttle to -1. This is essentially braking. So we have 1, which gives us the opportunity to go forward, means the train can go forward. We have -1, which means it will brake. We also have hooked into the on button released function, and we set the throttle to 0, so essentially coasting. With those buttons, with that additional script added to the cab control script there, the only other thing you might want to do is on your locomotive in the manual driver, consider what maximum safe speed you want to give your players, and you can activate the speed limiter, or you can deactivate it if you want to just give them free rein, which might be fun. And that's essentially it to driving the train. You add the rider seat up here, you turn off auto driver, turn on manual driver. You add some additional functionality to your cab controller script so that the player can press buttons whilst they're riding the train. The buttons that I've hooked into are primary, secondary. Primary to go forward, secondary to brake or go backwards. And then on button released, if you're not pushing the throttle forward anymore, or you're not braking anymore, set the speed to neutral and just allow the train to coast. And that's it. Hopefully the quick guide has been useful. It's a lot of fun being able to now ride on your train, on your crazy route that you might have around your game. You can play around with different locations to place the camera, giving players opportunities to ride on top of the train or nearby. And this is not the be all and end all of TrackWorx. There's still plenty of additional functionality that we haven't even touched yet. Things like having different cameras positioned throughout the train ride to give it a more cinematic feel, mine carts, all sorts of additional stuff in TrackWorx. So I urge you to follow this quick guide and then think about what else you can make with this incredible package that we have at our disposal. And I look forward to seeing how you use it in Crayta.